record so I don't forget. All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming to the UTIG discussion hour. Really nice to see everybody. Today, we are glad to have Dr. Gail Christeson. She is the Associate Director here at UTIG, and Gail is a marine geophysicist. She has got a broad range of research interests, including the structure of the oceanic crust and the Chicxulub impact crater. And you also probably have heard great things about her Python and geoscience course. And today, she's going to talk to you about the AGU fellow selection process. So without further ado, here's Dr. Gail Christeson.
Hey, thank you, Naoma. Yeah, so as you can see from my title, I'll be talking about the selection process for AGU fellows and what I learned from serving on the Tectonophysics subcommittee at AGU. Okay, so a little background information. So I attended an AGU honors workshop at one of the fall meetings and learned more about how to nominate people for AGU awards. And afterwards, I helped prepare nomination packages for several UTIG scientists. And I'll tell you more about the nomination pack a little bit later. These nominations were unsuccessful. So I asked for some feedback from Julia Morgan, who's the president, who at the time was the president of the Tectonophysics section of AGU. And I think because of these queries, I was on her mind when she was looking for someone for the Tectonophysics section fellows committee who could represent the marine geophysics side. And so I was invited to be part of this committee for a 2-year term. And I participated in my first AGU Fellows process in the summer of 2020. So that's what I'll be presenting today, what I learned. Okay. All right, and everything I'm going to say, I'm not going to be presenting any confidential information that I learned. So this is more just a broad overview. So looking first at the eligibility of nominees for AGU fellows, they must demonstrate scientific eminence in the earth and space sciences through achievements in research. And these can be demonstrated by one or more of the following: breakthrough or discovery, innovation in disciplinary science, cross-disciplinary science, instrument development or methods development, and or sustained scientific impact. And I can tell you that most of the packages we saw definitely focused on the third, sustained scientific impact.
Gail, can I interrupt you for one moment? You got real quiet all of a sudden there. Could you speak up?
Okay, let me check my microphone.
Okay, sorry, my microphone switched. Okay, can you hear that now?
Yeah, that's much better. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, so most of the packages we looked at focused on the sustained scientific impact. All right, so what are the other qualifications? The nominee must be a middle or senior career scientist. And I looked that up. Middle career is greater than 10 years of receiving a PhD. And a senior career is greater than 20 years. So they have to be at least 10 years since their PhD, an active AGU member for the past 3 years, and in compliance with their honors conflict of interest policy, which is mainly that if you're like a president of a section, you're not eligible. There's some other things. And then selected nominees would need to sign a self-disclosure form. Okay, so what's in the package? So there are basically 4 things, and each of them have a 2-page limit. There's a nomination letter, and this has a 1-sentence citation, which you have probably seen when someone gets a fellow. They are not. There's a little description that describes why they're getting it. Let's see. curriculum vitae, so a CV, and again, a 2-page version, a selected bibliography, and then 3 letters of support. And the nomination letters, so the lead letters, cannot be written by advisors. So either a master's advisor, a PhD advisor, or a postdoc advisor cannot write a nomination letter. They can write a supporting letter if it's been 5+ years since the formal relationship. And then the same applies for former students or postdocs regarding letters for advisors. All right, so I guess like one of my students could never write a lead letter for me. All right, so let's go over the timeline. And I have this little photo because things seem to happen very fast all of a sudden. So the timeline was impacted by COVID. So they extended the nomination deadline, AGU did, until June 1. Then in mid-June, there was an orientation webinar for all the sections, their fellows committees. And I actually had to miss that one because I had a conflict. And then each section had an organizational meeting where you went over the process. And then the nominations were available. So this was through an online platform. So late June 29th. And then our first section meeting to discuss nominations was July 3rd. So this was a really quick turnaround. And then mid-July, we had our second meeting. And then we submitted our report at the end of July. So basically all this stuff is happening in our section committee. But then there's another part of the process, and that's the Union Fellows Committee. So they have deliberations at the end of September. And then by the end of October, the announcement was made of who the 2020 class of fellows was. So I'm going to step through what I learned during this process. Okay, so I know this, you can't read this, well, maybe you can with a large screen, but this is just showing how many fellows are allocated per section. So each section committee may nominate, the graphic is hitting way too close to home. Oh, that must have been the last graphic. So each section committee may nominate up to 0.2% of their membership for the next review stage. So this is showing what that actually is. So Tectonophysics has 2,315 primary members. So members that say that's their primary affiliation. So we were allocated 5 candidates that we could advance to the next stage. All right. And you can see some of these other sections have fewer. The biggest one is actually atmospheric sciences, and then hydrology. All right. So that's how many can be advanced, but then the number that are actually elected cannot exceed 0.1% of the total membership. So if you look at the bottom, if you can see that, there are 62,612 AGU members. So that would mean that the class of fellows could be 62. And I hadn't realized this before, but there is actually a fair number of members who are non-affiliated. Okay, so that's my calculation, and you can see on the AGU webpage, I clipped this graphic. They did indeed have 62 new fellows. All right, so that's kind of the starting point. All right, so the preliminary ranking. So we had our organizational meeting and discussed how we were going to proceed. And the first thing was this preliminary ranking. On Monday, we had access to all the files for our section. And so that was the first time we found out how many there were. So we had 36 candidates. So remember, we could only advance 5, right? So our meeting was on Friday. So in 4 days, we had to evaluate all the files. And then we were supposed to provide a score from 1 to 10 for each of the candidates. So this is just an initial ranking to get the discussion starting. And we were supposed to use the full range. So just remember, these are all very qualified people, but we had to use the range from 1 to 10. So that meant 3 to 4 candidates, we would give a 1, 3 to 4 would get a 2, etc. And at our organizational meeting, it was suggested that this would take 1 full day. So if you take 8 hours divided by these 36 candidates, that would be 15 minutes per file. So let me just tell you, this was a very busy week for me. This is just my calendar of that week. And it was a very difficult timeline to do this 15 minutes per file. Okay. So and then I definitely spent more than 15 minutes per file. So so we did our ranking. Everybody got them in. So prior to this meeting, we have 6 committee members. Everyone entered their rating scores, and all of these were collated by the chair. The chair didn't have access to a few nominations that they were in conflict with. So those we had to email our rating to someone else, and then they added them in. So we had the summary spreadsheet with the average rating for each nominee. So they ranged, one nominee actually had a 1.2. So everybody ranked that person very highly, all the way down to an 8.0. And there were some, we're scientists, so we could look at the standard deviations as well. Okay, so we had all these, the summary spreadsheet. So it was very interesting. The way this worked was we started in reverse order based on the average rating. So the goal of the first meeting was to decide whether the nominee should be discussed at the second meeting. So we're trying to reduce the number that we're going to discuss at our second meeting. So by starting at the bottom, each one, does this person, should this person be an AGU fellow? We looked over all their qualifications and their whole package, and we had seen all the other packages. And, what we're deciding is that, the placement of them in the bottom half, was that correct? And we also considered gender diversity. So by the end of the meeting, we hadn't discussed everyone. We had discussed about 2/3 of the nominees. And we were left with 21 to discuss for the second meeting. So we didn't drop everyone that we discussed. Okay, so what happened at the second meeting? So this time we had 12 days to review the files of the remaining 21 nominees and enter a new ranking for each. So this time we ranked from 1 to 9. And then all the ones we decided to drop, we had to enter a 10. That was just to make the downloaded spreadsheet make sense. So then we had the same process. The chair shared the summary spreadsheet with the average rating, which ranged from a 1.0 to a 7.8. And then this time we went in the other order. We discussed all the nominees in order based on their average rating. And the goal was to decide whether we agreed with their ranking order for the top 10. And so we discussed each person, and at this point we finalized our top 10 for submission. So you might have seen that other spreadsheet said we had 5, but we were told we actually advanced 10, but not all 10 would be discussed at the Union Fellows. And this is because most of the candidates were nominated to multiple sections. So there'd be a primary section and then other sections. So some of the people we looked at, Tectonophysics was a secondary section. So then after the meeting, we prepared a final report that had a paragraph summarizing the nomination for each of these top 10. So what did I learn from these Tectonophysics section meetings? So I can say our discussion really did focus on scientific excellence and sustained contributions. So you won't see in here H-index. That was not really a factor at all. We looked at individual publications and how influential they were, but we didn't, have a number that we looked at. The nominee letter was extremely important, but all of the letters provided key details. And letters from experts in the field had the most value. Many nominees were nominated in multiple sections, but our committee focused on the contribution to Tectonophysics. And again, all nominees were outstanding, but we were limited to forwarding only a small number of the nominations. So again, we forwarded those. And then at the end of October, AGU announced their 2020 class of fellows. So there were 62 fellows, and 5 had been nominated to Tectonophysics, and we had looked at their packages, either as a primary or secondary affiliation. So again, I'm not going to disclose any confidential information, but this is, you can find all this publicly available. So the 5 that we had looked at in alphabetical order, Larry Brown from Cornell, who is really known for all his work with CoCorp, Continental Lithosphere Imaging, and carrying out extremely difficult campaigns to acquire data. Michael Brown from University of Maryland works on the origin of granites, as well as heat and mass transfer. Anne Devale from CNRS in France works on experimental fluid dynamics and mantle convection. Nadia Lapusta from Caltech works on earthquake physics and numerical modeling. And what was very interesting about her work is that earthquakes have happened. There's like some physics that happen very quickly, and then but you're also looking at very long time scales in between earthquakes, and that's what her modeling focused on, is kind of merge those two time scales. And then Jin Lin is someone I know quite well from Woods Hole Oceanographic, who works on mid-ocean ridges and also earthquake dynamics. And I also listed here their PhDs, so you can see the range. So there's definitely some more senior people, but then Nadia, her PhD is in 2001, so quite the range. So recently I was able to see some feedback on the unsuccessful nominations from the union's fellow committee. They said they evaluated 105 candidates across all disciplines. They selected 62. So the ones that were highly ranked by Tectonophysics, but were not selected, the comments were that these were feedback that went to their nominators. So highlight how their work was more significant or has a longer lasting impact than others doing similar work. More clearly highlight their major breakthroughs and or discoveries. The letters seem more like a list of things that they have done, right? A list of work is not helpful. Focus on scientific discovery, impact, how they transform the field in a manner understandable to non-specialists. So I kind of noticed this in our deliberations that there are some people that I had ranked kind of low, and I just wasn't compelled by the lead nomination letter. And I think that's some of what, and then when we had our discussions and you look in the package more closely, you change your ideas. And we definitely had a consensus on our top candidates. But then it goes to the Union Fellow Committee. And again, this is across all disciplines. So you really have to make sure that it's clear how the nominee stands out in terms of their scientific impact. And then, there are some that weren't forwarded by Tectonophysics. So these were not our highly rated candidates. And again, the comments that we saw here were explain the broader implications of the work instead of stressing publication statistics and awards. And then one of them said the nomination package focused a lot on service, which is not the primary criteria for an AGU fellow. And they actually suggested nominating for a different award. So other feeds that I saw on candidates, so these are not from the Union Fellows. So these are ones that were not forwarded out of the section. That a letter from a graduate or postdoc advisor may not be helpful, that it might be better to have a different person write a letter. Explain, so this next one was about a letter that cited a lot of papers, but didn't really say how the nominee contributed to the papers because they weren't the first author. So, maybe it was their student, but it just wasn't clear. So people could be nominated in different sections. And so this was kind of a common thing, was that the contribution and breakthroughs in the section in terms of their science was less than other candidates. So maybe they weren't, maybe, it doesn't, you shouldn't just check all the boxes. It doesn't help the nomination. Highlight the breadth, community service. This one said what I just said, listing of many sections, maybe limiting the success of the nomination package. The principal scientific accomplishments were mostly outside the primary section selected by the nominator. And then try to make a stronger case for sustained innovative contribution. And then just some final information I gleaned by looking at these feedback letters was they actually mentioned how many nominees were evaluated by different sections. So these were only from the letters I saw where people were nominated for Tectonophysics and also another section. So we had 36 nominations. And again, we were allocated 5. Seismology is allocated 6, and they only had 26, right? Volcanology, geochemistry, petrology, they had about the same as Tectonophysics, 34, but they're allocated some more. Global environmental change had even more nominations and the same number as Tectonophysics. And then you can see some of the others, smaller ones, natural hazards, geodesy, nonlinear geophysics, 10, 8, 6. And then ocean sciences had 39 nominations, and they could advance 11. And then SETI, study of the Earth's deep interior, had 13, and they could advance about 1. So other things I learned. So the first ranking was very difficult because of the compressed timeline and the breadth of the nominees. But it actually worked. The nominees that we eventually ranked as our top 10 Um, so the ones that we eventually ranked as our top 10 actually came out close to our top 10 in the initial ranking. But personally, I had placed them from 1 to 26. And I think I probably emphasized metrics too highly, like publications per year, citations per year. And this was just because of the compressed timeline. But the second rankings allowed me time to examine each package more fully. And I spent about 30 minutes per file. And that the nominees that we eventually ranked as our top 10, I gave rankings that placed them from 1 to 16. So we really did reach a good consensus. And the union's fellow committee did not select one of our top candidates. So one that we had put in our top 5. And I think this just emphasizes the importance for letter writers to make the impact of the nominee clear to non-specialists. So we were able to write a paragraph, but it's the whole package that's important. And I will end there, and I'm ready to take questions. So thank you.
Awesome. So if you guys have questions, you can either unmute yourself and ask them out loud or type them into the chat.
Hi, Gail.
Hello.
How long would you say did you work on your nomination or the people that you nominated?
So, oh yeah, so I forgot to go over that. So the people I nominated, so I didn't nominate any. What I did was, after I went to this workshop, I was very excited about making sure that my colleagues were nominated. So I kind of talked to other people and found people that I thought were worthy of a nomination. And then what I did was put together the materials that they would need. So that CV and the bibliography, and email to try to find someone who'd be willing to be the lead nominator. And then help them find other letter writers. So that was kind of what I did. Does that make sense? So I think that helps a lot for someone making a nomination to have that material ready for them.
Yeah.
So the idea is to make it easy for other people to nominate people at the Jackson School.
Yeah. It also, I think I wrote down the CV, because you want to have an updated CV on your website so people can nominate you for stuff, I suppose. Or I guess you have to ask them, and then in which case it's like, why is your colleague randomly asking for your CV? So do you think the people that you were thinking about nominating knew?
So, it's you can just directly ask, but the other thing is that I know that everybody has to give an updated CV every year, right? For scientists. So I could email Rosalind in my case and say, hey, Rosalind, could I have a current CV for so-and-so? But yeah, they should be on the website.
Looks like Kirk has his hand up as well.
Yeah. Hi, Gail. Thanks for the nice talk. I was just curious. So I had 2 questions. How many people were on the selection committee?
So I know our committee had 6.
6?
Our section.
Okay. And just the different kind of categories for why you would nominate somebody for an AHU fellow, like the scientific discovery, sustained impact. Were there different rubrics provided to compare those two against each other? Because one could be a decade's worth of science, the other one could be something that changed things in 1 year, 5 years ago. And I'm just wondering how you would compare those.
Yeah, so I asked as well, how are we supposed to evaluate these candidates? And I was told we evaluate them on those 3 criteria. And so we had to make our own evaluation of how we, what did we weigh different aspects. And I think probably the cross-disciplinary people have the hardest time falling through the cracks. And I think that's where the Union Fellows Committee hopefully tries to work on that. But if they're not forwarded out of their section, then they never see them.
Thanks.
So I see Rowan had a comment about that each unit has an awards group. Yeah, and so at the time UTIG did not have an awards committee, but UTIG does now have an awards committee that does work to facilitate these kind of nominations.
I had a question. You said it was mostly ended up focusing on sort of sustained excellence, and it was like median and senior scientists. Is there a big difference in people who have been in the field for 20 plus years compared to some of the younger candidates, and what kind of work or excellence?
So I think we kind of talked about this. There seemed to be like well, even though those PhDs ranged quite a bit, there seemed to be kind of like a sweet spot, because if people were too senior, their productivity seemed to have fallen off. In terms of their sustained impact, it's like, oh, most of this work was, not as recent. But then some people who are more junior, they've done this good body of work, but is it sustained? So I'd say it definitely favors closer to the senior, because what did I show? Like 2001 was the most recent PhD. So that'd be what, about 20 years. So that they had just become senior. Yeah.
Interesting.
And I'd say the other thing with the letters was it didn't help. Some people had letters that were just kind of from like, wasn't a broad range of letters, people who are focusing on the same things didn't made the packages a bit weaker. Like if someone is from a country and all the letters are from that country, and maybe it's a small country, that didn't go over as well.
We have time for more questions if anyone has anything else.
Well, I guess the other thing I can say is that some people feel it's very important that the letters are written by AGU fellows. And I don't think that was important. I mean, it was important that they're written by leaders, people who really knew the field. But it's not like anybody was saying, oh, this one, none of these are AGU fellows.
That's interesting.
I was going to ask, sorry, I missed the first part of your talk, Gail, because my URGE Podlet meeting ran over, but we were actually just talking about these kind of sort of review panels and things like that, and kind of how objective versus subjective they are. And people were suggesting that maybe they should go towards more qualitative reviews instead of quantitative. So I was wondering, in your opinion, kind of how qualitative versus quantitative, or how objective versus subjective you felt the whole process was in general.
Yeah, so it was definitely more qualitative in terms of, initially I was kind of quantitative because I had 36 packages to look at, and the easiest way to start the ordering was by using some metrics, like they got their PhD and then how many publications have they done, or how many citations, just to get an idea, because if someone got their PhD 20 years ago and hasn't had that many citations, that probably means that they haven't had a sustained impact, right? But so that was kind of like my first look at it. But the second go around, it was really looking at every package in full and not looking at the metrics, because people in different, even in tectonophysics, there's different aspects of tectonophysics, and some will get cited a lot more than others. So it's more like, how impactful is their research? on that field. So that's where the letters were really important, because otherwise you could just look at citations. You don't need letters.
Yeah, that makes sense. And something else we were talking about in our group too is about evaluating or like reading letters of recommendation if there were potential barriers from people coming from non-native English speaking countries, because their letters might not be perceived as impactful due to potentially like the writing not being as clear or something like that.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I don't think I saw any poorly written letters.
Interesting, thanks.
So we've got a question in the chat. It says, how do you think grad students help if not by writing letters of rec?
Oh, how could grad students help like this kind of nomination?
Yeah, because you said it wasn't as powerful to have students or postdocs.
Yeah, so I guess it's more in terms of getting other people. I think there's you need to have some momentum. You need someone to take the initiative and say, hey, so-and-so really deserves to be nominated for an award. And then you can contact someone, hey, what do you think? Do you think so-and-so? And so you can make that initial contact and give information about why you think someone deserves the award. But this is for the AGU fellows. For other awards, like early career awards, then it's not as important. So their early career awards often have, like a postdoc advisor could write a nomination for someone, a letter, and that would be perceived as okay. So I think graduate students, trying to get the momentum started, and for the early career awards, if you have someone in that category. So Rowan, you want to speak up, Rowan?
Sure. I'll just say that I've had good luck with basically just trying to get people on board. So for example, if you've got someone that you're not in a position to write a letter for them, go and find someone else who's a bigger name or something like that and help them put it together. Because a lot of times people are like, oh, I don't have time to write a letter, but you could sit down and send them a bullet point list of like, hey, here's why this person would be a great nominee, because look at what they did here, look at what they did here, look at what they did here. And by the way, here's one of their recent CVs. And it's not always going to land, but like if someone only has 30 minutes to submit a nomination, by giving them that information, you'll facilitate it. So, I mean, again, maybe not for one of the, like Gail was saying, maybe not for like an AGU fellow, but like, especially that's something that like a number of us have been trying to do more frequently, is just like going out and like reminding people like, hey, this due date's due this time. Remember how we talked about what a good colleague so-and-so was? Like maybe they'd be a good person for this award. So that actually lands more often than I think it will.
Yeah, I was going to say the hard part about this process was that there are just too many good people, and you really have to stand out. So trying to show how someone stands out is key. You can't just be a good scientist, You have to be 0.1%, right?
Awesome. Any other questions? Great. Well, thanks so much for chatting with us, Gail. This was a really cool discussion hour, and I really liked how much of a discussion it was as well with the Q&A. So next week we have Zach Sickman, and his talk is titled Thinking About Sand Mining from Source to Sink. So please join us then. Bye, everyone.
Bye.